Hey Maya, hi Matea. What brings you guys in today?
We were just wondering if we could talk a little bit about the grading stuff going on this year.
Sure, what's up?
Some of us were wondering about the new grading policies and we wanted to know what led to this change.
Yeah, good question. So I think it's important that you know that these changes are not, first of all, they're not things that happened overnight. So it's been, I would say, 7 years or so we've been talking as a faculty. 7 years ago we formed a grading committee. So there was a member from each department, administrative team. I was a Spanish teacher at the time. And what we started to do as a committee was just to research what were the best practices around grading and also assessment too. You can't really talk about grading without talking about the way you assess. And right away in this committee we realized that a lot of our practices around grading were damaging even to student learning, and so we kind of knew that we had to start to think about how do we start to make a shift as a school. And so right away, I would say even 7 years ago, these changes started, and I think as students and as parents, you don't feel those changes because they've been pretty subtle and they happen gradually over time, but we do things quite a bit differently than we did 7 years ago. We also now, we have a school leadership team, which is kind of the same premise as the grading committee, but just for more things. So we have a representative, the chair, department leader from each team and our administrative team, and we talk about what are some good changes that we would make in the school and how are we going to make them. So one thing we decided is that we need to bring in an outside consultant, an expert, and so last February we brought in Tom Schimmer, who's a consultant. He's one of the leading assessment and grading consultants in the world, and he worked with our staff and the middle school staff for an entire day and really helped inform us on kind of what were the next steps we needed to take on making grading happening for learning, not just to rank and sort students. So I think as a staff we really say we have this set of beliefs about what is best about grading and assessment, and it's grounded in research, and we have practices, and those two have to align. We have to start doing what we know is best for student learning.
So this sounds like a pretty big change. Why didn't you communicate with us last year before we started?
Right. The last thing that we wanted to do was surprise people or make students or parents uncomfortable. I think really there's two reasons. The first is we've never, maybe the first isn't a great reason, but we've never communicated as a faculty how different teachers or different teams of teachers do their grades. So we've never communicated to parents that, you know, the government team uses this grading system and that the algebra team uses this grading system. And there's been quite a bit of difference amongst all those teams. And really, maybe the bigger reason, the more applicable thing, is that many of your teachers have been actually using these practices for a while. Last year, our entire Spanish department used these practices, many of our English classes and math classes. So it went really well, and so you know, we didn't think there was really a need, but the last thing we want to do is alarm people or you know, have students be afraid that their grades are going down or anything like that. So I felt like this was good timing that we talked about this.
So we're talking about grading. What would a grade represent?
Yeah, this is a really important question, and this was, as a grading committee, as a school leadership team, this was our starting point. We had to agree, based on research, what should the grade mean? What should it represent? And so we acknowledge that historically grades, they mean behavior, they mean compliance, they mean effort, they mean attendance, all those types of things. And what research clearly shows is that the grade should be the student's knowledge and skills on the standard or learning target that the teacher's teaching. And what research also clearly shows is that when the grade does represent knowledge and skills, nothing else, that it actually has a positive impact on student learning. So what happens when the grade really is based on knowledge and skills is that the students, the teacher, parents, if they want to be involved, get a really clear picture about where learning is happening and where it isn't. And then students and teachers and parents can use that feedback, that evidence, that data to work on areas where we're weak and celebrate areas where we're strong and actually get momentum in learning. So it is a shift. The way I went to school is that a big part of my grade was, did I know how to do school? Did I know how to turn things in? Did I know how to be on time? Did I know how to participate? But it really, again, research shows us that the grade should be the knowledge and skills on that target.
So doesn't everything we do show our knowledge and skills in the class?
Yes, good question. Good question, Matea. Yeah, I think as a student you kind of think, well, that's everything I do, right? I do homework and it shows what I know, and I participate and it shows what I know. And the reality is that we do a lot of things in school to show our learning and to learn, but not everything that we do actually produces evidence of learning. For example, I guess I would start by saying there's really three different types of things that you might do as a student. You might practice, okay, just straight practice, which is really important. You might do practice that actually gives you some feedback. So you could try a problem and get feedback on how you're doing, right? So there's practice where you get feedback, and then there's events that actually tell you if you've learned it or not. So let's dive into the first one, that practice. Homework is practice, right? So it's real interesting when you do research on homework that in elementary school, homework actually has a negative impact on student learning, which is really interesting. In middle school, there's a very marginal gain in learning from homework, but in high school, homework actually has a positive impact on student learning. So we know homework's important, but what we also know about homework is that it very rarely, if ever, and if it does I wouldn't call it homework, it very rarely actually shows what a student knows or can do. So oftentimes you'll have an assignment and you go home and you are practicing, but you come back to class and it doesn't necessarily provide the teacher evidence that you've learned. It's important practice and it should lead us to those assessments that provide evidence, but it's not the evidence. It's just simply important practice. What we call formative assessment for learning, is practice that actually gives you feedback. Okay? So homework does not really give you feedback. You do it, but the teacher does not necessarily check it, give you feedback. The teacher doesn't know whether you did your own work, whether you Googled it, whether you used your textbook, and so we don't really have evidence of learning. Formative assessment is non-threatening practice where we simply want to give you feedback. All right, that's kind of the second category. The third category actually provides evidence of learning. So right away our minds go to a test, right? A test is kind of that assessment, not for learning, but assessment of learning. And that's a misperception. And a summative assessment, an assessment of learning, does not have to be a test. There's many ways to provide evidence of learning, right? It could be an interview with a teacher. It could be showing your teacher one math problem when you meet one-on-one. It could be a presentation or a project, but there needs to be some evidence of learning. One other area, when we talk about that formative assessment, that non-threatening practice, one area where we've really found out that we've damaged student learning is by averaging grades. Okay, so what's been long-standing practice in education is that you accumulate all these points, right? You do homework, you get points. You take a quiz, you get points. You do a test, you get points. Everything is this point value, and then we average them. And what we've realized is that we've really damaged student learning by averaging grades. I'll give you an example. I was in a class a few years ago, and the teacher was passing back a quiz. And I happened to be sitting with a student, and the student got a 14 out of 40 on this quiz. And it was a new student to Grand Rapids Christian, it was early on in the year, and so right away I could just see defeat on this student, right? The message to the student was, you're not a good learner, maybe you don't even belong here, you're not going to cut it, okay? And I moved closer to him and I said, you know, what do you think happened? And as we looked at his quiz, he had flipped 2 terms, and that was the reason that almost all the points came off the quiz, because he had just mixed up 2 things. And so I was interested in this and could tell he was really defeated, but I stopped and talked to the teacher after, and I said, so what's going to happen to this student's grade? And the teacher said, well, it'll go in the grade book, and you know, he's going to be at an E for a while, because 14 out of 40, that's under 50%, and it's going to be hard for him to recover. But if he does really well on the test, he'll probably could get back in like the C or D range, and then if he works really hard all semester, he might be able to get back in the A range. Not likely, but maybe. And so I said to the teacher, do you think that the student now knows the learning target? And the teacher said, oh yeah, he'll probably never forget that as long as he lives. And so my question was, so you're going to put this in the grade book as a 14 out of 40 on this learning target, but you now have a lot of confidence that the student actually knows the learning target. And the teacher said, well yeah, that's just what we do. Everything goes in the grade book. And so what should have happened there is, after the teacher taught the learning target, gave a homework practice, the teacher should say, class, we're going to have a formative assessment on this target tomorrow. It's going to be a great opportunity for us to figure out where you're at in your learning. Some of you got it already. I could tell that right when I taught it, but some of you need more practice. And so the purpose of the formative assessment is for you to figure out where you are. And if you're not where you want to be, you're not where I want you to be, we're going to keep working at it. And that just shifts the way the student thinks about mistakes, right? When I know that my mistakes can lead to future learning, then I'm excited to get results. I'm not afraid of what's coming, but I know that the teacher's going to work with me. Any other area in life other than school, you know, when you practice something and you make mistakes, your practice leads to success later on. And our practice of averaging grades was not allowing for students to make mistakes early on in their learning. So we were penalizing students for mistakes before we even had a chance to work with them. So we were really doing damage to a student's grade, and we were crushing students' hope and confidence about learning. So that's a big shift. We were using formative assessment for a summative grade. So that's one shift that we have to make.
Okay. So you talked about homework, formative, and summative assessments.
Right.
What does that mean for my grade?
Okay, good question. So really what we're saying is homework is practice, formative assessment is practice that should just give you feedback and give the teacher feedback. So by definition, the only thing that should impact a grade is anything that gives us evidence, and that's what we would call summative assessment. The misperception, again, is that summative assessment has to be this big unit test. So what we're saying to teachers is, if it's going to impact the grade, it has to be evidence of learning, which we would call summative assessment.
Okay, so what does that mean for homework? Why would someone do their homework if it doesn't count for their grade?
Okay, good question. So yeah, I think an important thing to know is that we said earlier, homework is very important, right? It is practice that you need to learn. What we also know is that when we give points for homework, and homework is not evidence of learning, it's bad data. It makes the grade not reflect what a student knows and is able to do. We really, in our previous few years, were hardly counting homework at all, and many students didn't know that. Some teachers were not counting it at all towards the grade. So we do want homework to be required, and so it is required. If a teacher assigns you homework, you have to do it, but the accountability to do the homework is not tied to points that you receive. So if you get a math assignment, you have to do it, but not because you're going to get points. You have to do it because the teacher thinks it's part of the plan that's going to help you learn. So in school, during students' responsibility period or study hall, if they haven't completed their homework, we'll pull them aside and hold them accountable and require them to do that work. In the past, we've used the grade as accountability for homework. And again, what research shows is if a student didn't care enough to do the homework and got a 0 on the homework, they didn't care about the 0. And so students that weren't doing their homework, we'd give them 0s and they didn't care. They just continued to not do the homework. So we had this assignment that we'd give students for learning. They'd get a 0, and in some cases, since it was late, we would say to them, and now you can't do your homework. Or and really what we were saying is you can't learn. We're not going to allow you to learn. So we've changed our accountability over the last year from using points for accountability towards just requiring students to do it. And we have far more homework turned in now than we ever did when we used points as accountability. So it's still up to the student, just as it was before, with how much integrity are you going to do your own work? How much effort are you going to put into it? But that was true whether we gave points or whether we assign homework just for learning.
So if the grade is based on summative assessments, is there going to be a chance for a reassessment?
Very important question. So one of the fundamental beliefs that we have about students, and specifically we believe this as Christians, is that we're all different. We all learn at different paces. So, you guys may be wonderful students, but there's going to be some time when you have a learning target where it just takes you a little bit longer to get it. And so previous policy of saying you can no longer learn after this point, it's just not acceptable. If our promise to you as students and parents is that you're going to learn the most important targets in all your classes, to say that you have to learn them by this date is silly, and it's not good practice. So absolutely, if we require that teachers base grades on evidence of learning, we never want to say to a student, you can't show evidence of learning after a specific date. So if you take a summative assessment, what we want that data from the summative assessment to show is not just you got 55 out of 80 on a test, but how did you do on each learning target in the test? Because there's probably in that 55 out of 80, there's probably 2 or 3 targets that you did really well. And then there's probably 2 or 3 that you need more work on. And so if there's 2 or 3 that you need more work on, then certainly we want to reteach you, and then we want to give you another chance. And so we've built our whole schedule around what we believe is biblical about how students learn. That we want to give you good instruction, we want to give formative assessment that figures out, are you learning? And then we want to give you more time during focus period and office hours where we reteach you where you still need additional time and support. So absolutely. There's some logistical things that teachers have to wrestle with. You can't reassess forever. But certainly if the learning target is important and you didn't learn at a level of proficiency, then not only are you allowed to reassess, we would require you to reassess, because it's our way to get evidence about whether or not you're learning.
Okay. So what do you think this will mean for my grade? Will it go up or will it go down?
Good question. Yeah. I think the important thing that students and parents hear is we are committed to practices that are going to put students in a great position to do what they want to do after high school. And so if our grades go down, then I think we've got issues, right? We're making adjustments based on what research tells us about student learning. So we really believe that learning is going to go up. So I think one thing about grades going up or down, a misperception, is that homework has counted for so much. Some of our teachers kind of took last year's grades and figured out if homework hadn't counted at all towards the grade, how would that have changed? And it was so minimal. And so that homework help that maybe helped students grade a little bit, let's think about how that would balance with the practices that we want to have now. The first thing that you have to think about now is that we're giving frequent feedback where you can judge where you are in your learning, and then we support you. We have good data because all our evidence is about learning. We have good data to know who needs more support, so we're going to support you really well. The other thing that is going to help your grade is that we're no longer averaging grades early on in a unit or early on in a learning target, where you should just be getting feedback about your mistakes. So making a mistake just after the learning target is taught is harming grades now. And the other thing that's going to be important for grades is multiple chances. So again, if you take an assessment on 5 targets and 2 of them are really low, and we're going to give you more opportunities to show evidence that you've learned, that's going to help grades. So we recognize that test anxiety is real, and we think we're creating a culture that's transparent about what we want you to know, that says you get multiple opportunities in multiple ways to show what you've learned, and so we believe that anxiety is going to go down, and we actually think grades will go up. Now, who knows if every circumstance is specific, but our promise is learning, and so we can't mask lack of learning with a bunch of homework points, and so we're holding ourselves accountable. Well, thank you guys for talking today. I appreciate that you were willing to ask. I think if I was going to sum up, the grade has to be based on evidence of learning, and so there's lots of things that are important to help you learn, but we're committed to having evidence of learning because that's our promise to families. So if you have any other questions, you're always welcome to stop in and talk.
Thanks so much.
Thank
You bet.
you.
You bet. Have a great day.
You too.